All right, I wanted to talk about the Simone Biles situation at the Olympics. I thought, first and foremost, is it was one of the most courageous acts I've seen in sport. It's quite often easier, as much as we think it's very heroic to go back into a game or go step forward into something. But sometimes it's even more courageous to actually step away. So I think that alone by Simone speaks volumes, and I think the world has realized that, which is super awesome. The one thing I've realized since this situation in reading articles online, there's a big focus on, well, it's people taking advantage of Olympians, and it's the Olympics' fault and the advertisers' fault, et cetera. That's coercing these athletes. And then the other side is people will say, well, the answer is increasing therapy or increasing resources, mental health resources for these athletes. And again, I still think we're missing the problem with either of those. Right? I think we're still missing the crux of the problem and what needs to be talked about when it comes to behavioral health, mental health, and athletes. And I've said it before, one of the problems is, and we see it here, we've separated mental health and performance. Right? So we have an athlete and we say, well, they need more mental health resources. We haven't put those two together. We're just saying they need to go and get those resources and then come back to sport when they're ready, when they have the resources and they're able to do so. Again, I think we're missing the problem there. So where to begin? So as an athlete, we're right now, there's a common narrative that we have to hyper focus to be successful. We have to be willing to put the blinders on, block everything else out, 10,000 hours, hyper focus, execute. I think this is reinforced in the Michael Jordan movie, and we see that movie and think, okay, if I want to be the best, and I do want to be the best, then that's how I have to do it. And so it's actually very, very simple. What happens is you get as an athlete, there's someone that comes along and says, hey, you're pretty good at this sport. And that little bit of serotonin feels pretty good. And as you get older, more people are saying that to you. Hey, you're great at this sport. Wow, you're impressive. More serotonin. You start to notice yourself improve now. You're committing more time, more hours. Now it's the dopamine that's carrying you through. This feels really good, right? As you're growing up, excelling. And then what happens here? This is where things get interesting. And then what starts to happen is you start to hyper focus on that sport. And of course, rightly so. Everyone's telling you that's how you become the best. That's the best way to do it. And you become this single-eyed, I'm referencing some philosophy, but you become this single-eyed person, one personality almost, motivated by one idea, being that sport. And that's what's pulling you through life. That's what's orienting your life. Right? So it becomes the value of this one idea, being the best at this specific sport or concept, craft, whatever it may be. And then in doing so, as we hyper focus on that sport, we now put our blinders on to other things, other ideas, other parts of our life, other parts of our mind. We stop nurturing that with the belief that in doing so, in blinding ourselves to everything else, we're going to become the best at this sport. Right. And so you do, right? The reality is athletes often do. They become really good at that one domain, really strong, effective. They have high performance in that domain, but again, at the cost of blinding out the other parts of developing I would say, a healthy mind. Also life, just the behaviors in other parts of your life, socially, connections in other ways, other life experiences that allow you to feel full, allow you to feel fulfilled. Now, this is where mental health joins performance, all right? So we take things one step further. So now here's the gap in the conversation. So we have these single-eyed, right, again, to reference the philosophy, these single-eyed, single motivator individuals running around chasing this one finite idea, blinders on, and no one's saying, hey, maybe you should nurture other parts of your life. Not treat the anxiety, treat the depression, which is only masking the symptoms. But let's go one step further and say you should be nurturing other parts of your life and other parts of your mind. So what happens when we refrain from doing so, from leading these athletes to other life experiences? The sport now shifts. The value of sport's relation to the individual's life goes from an opportunity to develop friendships, life experiences, learn through challenges. It's an opportunity initially. And then it switches. As we drown out everything else, block out everything else, it shifts to avoidance of failure. So it becomes whipping ourselves to do the right things, coercing ourselves to do the right things. We have to perform. We have to execute. This is all we have. Now I think you're starting to see where the behavioral health and the performance starts to come together. So when you're expected to perform, weights on your shoulders, and you haven't developed those other parts of your life, other parts of your mind, you don't feel full, you don't feel fulfilled. What you feel is executing at this sport, executing right now is the one and only way to lead to a fulfilling life. Now try and perform, right? And so we're really like that now it shifts to a state of chronic stress. You're now trying to perform in that state of chronic stress with the weight of the world on your shoulders. That is partially fault of the individual, a fault of the athlete, right? To not nurture those other parts of their life, to say, hey, it's okay if this doesn't work out. Damn, I've nurtured a lot of other parts of my life. We can get through this. We can do this. So there's a shift from the love of playing sport to a whip to execute because you have to avoid failure, because this is all you have. This is the answer to a fulfilling life. And that's a very different approach to sport. That's also a very different mindset going into performance. Right? At one point, it was an opportunity. You're relaxed. You're enjoying it. Now it's the whip of execution. And if I don't do this, failure can't happen because this is all I have. Let's look at this issue more rationally. What I mean is there's a resource crisis. Right, so there's an individual expected to perform. And I'm going to quote I was doing some work for school on PTSD in the military, and it's a similar conversation. And so they say the demands, so let's look at this from the athlete point of view, the demands to perform, the demand to execute. There's eyes on you, coaches are watching, people are watching, and it's a stress, right? That demand is a form of stress. You now need resources to meet that demand, meet that stress. Very simple. So demands are stressors that require biological, psychological, social, and spiritual resources to be engaged to cope with the challenges, to cope with the demands. And a demand imbalance, right, this is what we're talking about, is proposed as the primary pathway from stress reaction to stress injury, meaning if we don't have the resources to meet the demand, which is a normal process, there's a demand, we have the resources, we meet it, we move on. Very simple. If we don't have those resources, we don't have the biological, psychological, social, or spiritual resources, that now moves from stress reaction, which is healthy, to stress injury, right? We now don't have the resources needed to meet the demand. So I always say this, and I know it rubs people the wrong way, but the most sustainable model to perform with a clear mind, no life hacks, is if you're okay with losing sport. And that rubs people the wrong way. I know it does, because we're in a world where if you don't hyper focus and put every waking minute into sport, you're not going to be successful. It's a bit of the Buddhist detachment approach where it's not about not owning anything. It's not allowing anything to own you. So again, this is where I think we can bridge the gap between mental health and performance. Whether, I know we're talking sport, but obviously this is much more than just sport. So I think the real winners in this space, the real winners are the ones that can balance the nurturing of other parts of their life, nurturing of other parts of their mind, other ideas, other concepts, other life experiences, while also nurturing their performance in a certain craft, in a certain domain, which I totally believe and have seen it happen. I totally believe it's possible. And some people will be watching and say, you can't actually become excellent without hyper focusing on it and sacrificing everything to get there. And I would say the individuals that think that may not realize it's possible, but yeah, it's difficult. It is damn difficult to have that understanding, to have the wisdom to be able to do that, to lead your life and shape your life in a way where you're able to do that. And then the other part to this is it's difficult to open your mind and eyes to other parts of life when you are tunnel vision on that sport, right? When no one's telling you, hey, let's nurture other parts of our lives so that we can approach sport with our shoulders relaxed. We can see sport again as an opportunity, an enjoyable craft. It's not everything to us. It's hard to do that when you're hyper focused on that sport. It is. And so when we come back to this conversation of all the resources people are saying these athletes need, and they need counseling and therapy, and it's other people's fault. How about having the conversation about nurturing other parts of our lives, other parts of these young athletes' minds, that then allows them to approach sport with the thirst to perform. They see sport again as an opportunity like they did when they first began. So to bridge the gap as clear as I can between mental health and performance is that in nurturing other parts of your life, other parts of your mind, you are building up those resources to meet the demands when they come, because the demands are going to be there. There's going to be, as you climb up the ladder of sport, there's going to be more eyes, more pressure, and you're going to need more resources to meet those demands. And we know it's not just the demands of your ability to execute in the sport, but the demands of your mind. Can you handle that pressure? Can you handle the expectation? Can you hone in the focus for that 60-minute match or whatever it may be? That comes from a much greater approach to life, greater approach to the mind and your psyche that we're missing out on, that we're not guiding these athletes to develop. And so as much as there's a push to treat the symptoms of the anxiety and the depression, why don't we take one step deeper and focus on the cause? I want to sum up with Simone's story because, one, it was so courageous. Two, it shined a light on exactly what we're talking about. When she came out and said, hey, I'm going to step down from a couple competitions, and then she went into the village to see other athletes, they empathized with the decision she made. And she said she realized there was more than gymnastics and the Olympics. And that was a value change quite quickly to shift and see life through another lens. So what I think is so powerful about that is the fact that she proved we have agency as human beings. In this context, as athletes, we have the ability to make certain decisions, to change the lens in which we look through to see the world, in which we see our sport even. And in her own capacity, she shifted the lens in which she looked through to see the world, to see sport, to see gymnastics, from seeing it through this limited, restrictive fishbowl, everything that matters revolves around gymnastics, to shifting the lens to say, this sport is something I do that I'm incredibly good at, and I'm going to continue to nurture, but I'm also going to do it while seeing it through the lens of an authentic, everyday human that is curious and wants to experience other things, and realize in that life itself can be pretty exhilarating. It can be full of joy. And more importantly, it can ensure that I'm maintaining the resources I need so that when the cameras go on, when millions of people are watching me, I have the resources needed to go out and execute to the best of my ability, not only for her, not only for me, but in her shoes, for the country, for her team. And I think that's where the conversation needs to get to, is yes, treating the symptoms important, more behavioral health resources important. But what about how we guide these athletes to shape their lives? Because again, sport is just one piece of that.